All right, in case you're wondering, you're in the right place. Session 4B, monitoring and treatment, revised total coliform rule implementation. New rule, challenges for all the states and actually implementing it. The find and fix approach is a challenge and a lot more work for everybody, I think, but hopefully your speakers here will talk about how they're going to do it or how they've been doing it and help everybody with a long process probably of getting used to a new rule. Our first speaker is Richard Welsh. Richard's the manager of the Drinking Water Permitting and Recreational Waters Program, or Compliance Program section, South Carolina Department of Health and Environmental Control. And Richard is going to focus on the level 2 assessments, which is a pretty important part of the rule as well. If I can get your slides up here, Richard. And before I forget, I'd like to acknowledge the folks on the webinar, folks that are listening in. Hopefully everything is working better this time, and encourage our speakers to speak in the mic. If you're asking questions, also make sure you're speaking in the mic so the folks that are online can hear you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mike. All right, I'm going to be speaking about the RTCR from a state perspective. You guys hear me okay? State of South Carolina's perspective and kind of what we're doing and where we're going and maybe some of the trials that we've had and challenges to date. So what we've done a lot of presentations the last 8 or 9 years on this regulation, and everything that we've said has been find and fix, and we've heard that a lot from EPA. So our question has been now, what if you don't find anything? We've done a lot of these assessments. You'll see I have a lot of data to show. This regulation has an impact on our small businesses in South Carolina, and somebody actually mentioned this earlier. Our customers are in the campground, the veterinary hospital, convenience store, state park business. They're not in the water business. The water, drinking water is not their primary business, and so this has been quite a challenge on a lot of our smaller systems. Just a quick statistics, public supply wells in South Carolina. If you were to take a line and kind of divide it, the lower part of the state towards the coast is coastal plain, a lot of sand, a lot of public supply wells in that area. And then the upper part of the state is mostly surface water, but you can see we have a good shotgun approach all over the state for supply wells. We have about 60 surface water plants. I don't have those included here, but that's where the water in South Carolina comes from. We have about 2,500 public water systems. Of those, 580 are community systems, 101 non-transient, non-community. Those are the larger businesses. And the transient non-community is actually split out because this is important to us. We have 600, almost 700 non-seasonals, and then about 30 that are seasonals. And those of you that have any kind of seasonal systems know what challenges those present. And then the last, our state is a little bit unique, particularly in the southeast, in that we actually regulate less than the federal level of 15 connections or 25 people, and we call those state-defined systems. There's about 830 of those. So we tend to treat everybody the same, even those little guys, with regards to regulations and limits and things like that. So statistics on assessments, we've done roughly 218 assessments. I got this data from our compliance monitoring section. We've had about 78 level 2 assessments. That may not sound like a lot to some of the larger states out here, but with smaller staffs and downsizing, it really puts a strain. We've had 21 systems that have triggered multiple level 2. So they've got a level 2, gone back out, repeated samples, gone back out the next month or within a few months, and they've exceeded again, and they're right back in the level 2 sort of wheelhouse. We've had enforcement actions. 8 of them we've had straight up E. coli that have got an E. coli MCO. We've had 8 of those that have gone to enforcement. And we've referred 6 systems to enforcement that haven't completed the assessment or have ignored our repeated attempts to get them to complete the assessment. The success stories, I actually just changed this morning. I had it blank, and I felt like that wasn't really fair, so I put ongoing. We do have several, and I'll talk about those here at the end. So a little bit of the process and the history here in South Carolina. We have conditional primacy by EPA Region 4. Back in 2010, I mentioned we've been doing this about 8 or 9 years. Back in 2010, we decided we could see what the regulation was going to require. So we developed maybe a preliminary bacterial assessment form. We began using it for all of our systems, even those really small state-defined ones I was mentioning earlier. This early form we still use for those non-federal systems. There's about 800, I think, 30 of those. The early assessments were completed by our field office staff. We have 12 field offices around the state, and our drinking water program staff and those offices would complete those assessments to varying degrees of success. So along came the RTCR. We applied for primacy. I have round 1 because it's been multiple rounds with Region 4. So one of the things that you have to tell EPA is how you're going to do the level 1 and level 2 assessment. So I think this is similar to many states, is that we decided our level 1 bacteria assessment was going to be a self-assessment performed by the public water system. The level 2 assessment, initially what we said is we'd like our DHEC engineering staff out of our Columbia office. So that's my section, and I had at the time 4 engineers plus myself, and then actually have a groundwater operator, a certified operator on my staff too. So that gave us about 6 people. We have some of our compliance monitoring staff that they could also help out doing that. So again, and I think some of the things that we found out, the self-assessment process worked, but it wasn't very revealing, and it worked to the extent that somebody with a lot of knowledge filled it out. It didn't work to the extent that the secretary got it, or the person that was manning the customer service window. Sometimes they would get it and just write down what they thought to be true. So that was semi-successful, but it wasn't revealing about how you could answer questions about did this happen, yes or no. There were a lot of yes or no that they could answer, but it didn't really get into the why you have the challenges or why did you have the trouble to begin with. So again, I think Alan mentioned this earlier. We had a larger than expected volume of level 2 assessments, and then we got comments back from EPA about our initial primacy package. So some of the comments that EPA had, they said they liked our forms, that looked great. But then one of the biggies was, when does the state consider the assessment complete? So how do you, when you get those back, how do you know if it's complete or not? Can the state take enforcement action when the assessment is deemed not complete? And then for the level 2 assessments, how do you determine who's qualified? Because one of the things that we had a statement in there is that we said, well, we'll have a party qualified by the state. That's who we're going to allow to do these. Well, then they came right back with, well, who's qualified and how do you determine that? So we rethought our process and resubmitted to the EPA. So here's some of our answers. The forms look great, so there was no comment needed on that. And so when is the assessment complete? So we sort of relooked at everything in-house and determined the assessment is not complete unless corrective actions and the dates are included of when the corrections were made or when they're proposed to be made. We've implemented this and it seems to work really well. Can the state take enforcement action? The answer to that was yes. Nothing changed with our enforcement authority. How do you determine who's qualified? We have a list of what we consider qualified, and so we resubmitted everything to EPA. So for the resubmission in the round 2 on the primacy, the self-assessment, we were still going to let happen for level 1, let the public water system do those. For the level 2s, what we changed, and this has just been within the last year, public water system to hire somebody qualified. So I have hire in quotes because some of our smaller systems, one of them that comes to point is a small Christian, like a church camp type center. They reached out to a local smaller public water system, surface water system, and they had an operator, surface water operator, that went over and went through the system, followed our form, followed our approach, and that person didn't charge the utility to do that. The small church camp didn't get charged. So hire is just really in quotes to mean arranged to have completed. So and then we documented to EPA who we consider qualified. So there were 2 major bus stops that an individual would have to have. You have to have experience with water sources, treatment, and distribution. And a lot of this is right out of EPA's guidance manual and implementation guidance that they put out. The second bus stop was that an individual must hold some sort of professional license. So either a certified water operator, professional engineer, those would be the 2 that we would prefer. I've had a couple of licensed well drillers. All well drillers in South Carolina are licensed, so we've had a couple of those that have asked to be allowed to do the assessment. And then the assessor also has to meet the following criteria. We want somebody that has an understanding of the regulation itself and the objectives and the requirements. So not only just having a PE license doesn't necessarily qualify you to do it. You really need to understand water, drinking water, and the regulations. Understanding of coliform and E. coli to include sources, how it gets there, the fate of it, how you get rid of it. Coliform sampling procedures, because as we found out, the sampling and the attention to detail with sampling is very important. Experience with interpreting and analyzing water supply sources and operations. Familiarity with water system operations in general and how small changes can affect the entire water supply. And then special, if there was a certified operator is a great example, somebody that's familiar with that particular water system. Do you understand your own water system, the ins and outs? So typically what's happened is we send a letter out from our office and it says, all right, you've triggered a level 2 assessment. You need to go have a range. You need to go arrange to have somebody come perform this. Here's our form that we require that you use. Here's a list of people that are qualified, including all of these things that I've had on the last 2 slides. If you have any questions, call. So anybody want to take a guess on how many calls we get on those? Just about every one of them, every letter that goes out, they end up calling me because my number's on the bottom. So it's reduced the workload overall, maybe not on an individual, but overall it's been a little bit better, a little bit easier this year. And we seem to be getting better results, which is what we were after anyways. So some of the challenges that we've had, I'll go through a couple of case studies and then we'll wrap up and have some time for questions. So just general implementation, I would be remiss if I stood up here and didn't say that the old way we did it before the revised total coliform rule, I think in my opinion was better. If you had 2 total coliform rule violations at the time, we sent them directly to enforcement. Our enforcement is a pretty robust process. They require corrective action plans that are approved through several chains and several iterations. It was way faster to implement, and they were back out on the street implementing the changes faster than what it seems to be taken for the level 2 process or for the RTCR process. The workload on the staff, there's letters and follow-up for each of the processes, level 1 and level 2. There's continual technical assistance that's given throughout both of the processes, and then continuing, I mentioned multiple level 2s. I mean, that seems to be the bane of our existence right now. Continual technical assistance throughout all of that process, follow-up and reviews, site visits, things like that, process tracking. And then if you get into the enforcement process route, then that also takes, there's a whole different ballgame with that. Some of those referrals require additional steps. So I picked out 3 case studies maybe to highlight some of the challenges that we've had. So the first one is a veterinary hospital that's in a rural part of the state. They've now triggered multiple level 2 assessments. So who all's tried to help? We've had at least 3 different engineers, both from the state agency. We've had a couple of consultant engineers that the vet hospital has hired. We've had 1 well driller go out there that was the original driller that drilled the well. The well itself is only about 15 to 20 years old, so it's not, we do have historical wells in South Carolina that we discover all the time that have been in the ground for who knows how long, but this one hasn't been in the ground quite as long. 2 hydrogeologists, 1 from our agency and then 1 from outside, that have both tried to help. Some of the corrective actions that have been attempted, there's been 2 to 3, and I put in quotes, regular disinfections, put in hypochlorite bleach down the well, some sort of recirculation, pump it off, pump it through the system. There's been at least 1 superchlorination, which is something that one of the local well drilling companies offers. It's a higher volume of water that gets pumped in there. They push the solution out into the formation itself, and that's supposed to disinfect the formation in case there's bacteria growing out in the system. One of the first things we did with this system, and it seemed at the time to be the most obvious, as so many of these do, I mentioned this was a veterinary hospital. The sample site, the sample location was outside. It was a tap that was low to the ground, and it was in the dog run where they let the dogs kind of do whatever it is that dogs and other animals do. Maybe not quite so good a location, so we've kind of learned through the process as well. So that was the very first thing that was done. Now it's at an inside sink, which you would think would be a little bit better protected. Some of the things that we found out through their technical assistance with them, they're adjacent to a farm, and the farmer uses manure to spread around for fertilizer. I didn't get a lot into the geography of the state. This is in an area that's mostly rock, bedrock. The owner has told me on the phone problems began after the farmer, the nearby farmer, drilled and installed and began using an irrigation well to irrigate his pastures and his crops and things like that. And so our hydrogeologists, actually both of them, think there may be a possible hydraulic connection through some of the fractures. Anybody that knows underground geology knows that there's a lot of conditions that exist that you're just not going to find out. I've talked with the owner several times. Again, she's a veterinary doctor. She's a surgeon. She and her husband own this practice together. It was their dream to own this veterinary practice. Small town. There's not an availability of public water, so they're kind of stuck to a well. And I told her on the phone, I said, well, maybe you're talking about you drilling a new well. And she said, well, I'm open to that. I just don't want to drill something else and have similar problems and drill it into another contaminated aquifer. At the end of the day, we were able to resolve this one. They don't have that many staff. They don't have that many. Their patients are not human patients. So we were able to move them to our state-defined system. Doesn't necessarily take away that they're having issues. They've posted signs throughout, and they provide bottled water for their customers when they do have customers. They don't have that many people throughout the day. So again, not a permanent solution, but it was effective at least in getting them off our radar for the level 2 and for the RTCR. The second case study I had for you today is a national chain store. I don't want to say their name, but their colors are yellow and black, and they've exploded in the Southeast. Some of this is consolidation, and one dollar store buys out the other dollar store, and so the other one's trying to keep up, and it's all about competition. So we've issued through my office 11 permits for new stores since 2015. In our permitting process, that's actually 2, so that should be 22 permits. So we issue a permit to drill a test well, take the water quality parameters, come back with your final design, and we issue the second follow-up permit for that. So, and that doesn't include the stores that might be connected to an existing public water supply. I live in the city of Columbia, and even there, those stores are popping up everywhere. So I saw some smiles out there. You may have the same experience. So this one was a brand new store. It was built from the ground up. It's been in operation for about 1.5 years. So we're talking about a brand new well. It was a new construction for the store and a new well. Again, triggered multiple level 2 assessments. We had a local consultant engineer, kind of a one-man show. He's done a great job, does a lot of work, submits a lot of things to us. He found several items and offered that they helped us get them corrected. Then the store triggered. They were clean for about 2 months, and then they triggered another level 2 assessment. So I told you earlier, I have a staff member that's a certified operator, so he took a stab at it. He went out there and did another level 2 assessment using our form and our process. He didn't find any corrective actions, but he thought maybe there was a backflow concern. The first consultant that went out identified a mop sink. Didn't know if that was a sample location or not, but just in his general write-up, he said, you know, you have a mop sink in here where you're aspirating chemicals in and out. That might be a problem. On my staff, I also have a local backflow guy. He does all of our certifications for backflow testers in our state. He went out there and looked at it. He didn't say there was any kind of issue. The store shared with us that they had and I'll put it in quotes again, wastewater incident that was out in the parking lot not long after they opened. I don't have any idea what that was. The well is not in the parking lot. The well's on the other side of the store from the parking lot, so I don't know what that may or may not have contributed. But now the one thing with the well, it does have less. In South Carolina, we require a 100-foot pollution-free radius around the well. Anytime that we allow less than that, we make them grout the well deeper, which they did. In this case, it's about 30 feet from a stormwater retention pond, but the well is grouted to 100 feet. So this one is an ongoing challenge, and we haven't had a solution to this one yet, unfortunately. Case study 3 is a Boy Scout camp. This one's a seasonal system. They're open May through November. This one's been going off and on. I mean, they've had total coliform problems going back to the TCR. So this isn't something new that just popped up. They have multiple buildings, as I mentioned. There's multiple wells and tanks. This isn't just a little small camp by the lake. This one's pretty complex. The actual camp is maybe from the late 60s, mid to late 60s is how long it's been around. So from 2010 to the present, there's been 11 TCR MCL violations. They had 5 just in 2014. So that was pre-RTCR. So again, this was one of those that we knew when the rule hit, all right, we're going to have to spend a lot of time on this one system because we know they have issues. We've done multiple site visits for recommendations. We've told them to disinfect and flush lines, clean and disinfect and flush the tanks, review and enhance the repair techniques. So some of this you sort of leave information with them. You tell them what to do. You know, drive back to your office, wait a few weeks, and they have a coliform again, and you call them and ask them, did you implement any of our recommendations? Well, you know, we really couldn't because we have camp right now, and we're waiting until October when everything closes down, then we'll do everything. And you so want to get on the phone with them and say, but you have children. You know, we know they're serving children. That's the population of these camps. You know, you so want to get on the phone and say, you're serving children. One of the sites that's positive is your dining hall. So that, to me, should, as a professional, as a water professional, that's a big deal to me. But again, they're not in that business. They're in the scout camp business and the let's teach merit badges and climbing and shooting and swimming and all that goes with that. So again, I mentioned this camp is fairly old. They have a pretty extensive distribution system. There's a lot of leaks and breaks. This is in the upper part of our state, a lot of mountains. They have different elevation changes. That's why they have so many wells and tanks. And we thought we were doing good. We had a clean compliance history for them for 4 or 5 months. Last year in 2017, they triggered an assessment, I think it was August or September, and then they closed for the season. So, you know, one of the challenges that we have is how do you follow up with that? How do you have them on the hook to do some follow-up action, but they're closed. Nobody's there. The camp shut down, and a lot of times they shut the wells down. We've had other camps similar to this, and they completely winterize the system. They drain lines. They leave everything dry so they're not full of water, and that's been their problem in the past, is that they would leave the water in the lines. It would stagnate, and then in the cold weather, it would bust. So, again, an ongoing challenge that we've had. A couple of success stories that I have, I'll leave you with. I didn't want to just be all negative on this. We've had several state parks around. Just this year, we've had several that have gotten level 2 assessments, and they have a new engineer. Our state has had a large retirement in the state retirement system. There was a retirement program that recently ended at the end of June, so there's been a lot of turnover, not just in my own agency, but other state agencies around South Carolina. So, again, mail the letter out. I get a call from a guy that I knew that had worked at a local consultant firm, and he said, hey, I took over for Mr. Bob. He retired. I'm the guy now. What do you need me to do for these assessments? So, I have a lot of confidence and a lot of knowledge that he's going to do what needs to be done. So. This one state park got a level 2 assessment triggered in 2017. They took corrective actions. And as of right now, or as of when I did these slides earlier this month, they were currently 8 months consecutive without bacteria detection, which is good. Again, several state parks this year that have had assessments, they do a really, really good job. Again, maybe that's being a state agency and they don't want the negative aspect of noncompliance. Done a really good job of returning to compliance. And again, I think they probably feel better about picking up the phone and calling another state agency than a small vet hospital does, or than a national chain store does. And the last one I have is a private campground. They triggered a level 2 assessment in 2016. They took corrective action, and we returned them to annual monitoring just this year. So I'll leave you with those. I think that was the last slide I have. My contact number's here. If you have any questions, I'll try to answer those. If not, my group and I are here the whole time, so look forward to meeting some of you.
We have time for some questions. Please use the mic and please identify yourself.
Just making sure it was on. My name's Julia Norris. I'm from a water consulting engineering company. I was curious whether you found with the systems that are testing positive for coliform and using groundwater, whether the groundwater repeat sampling was giving you any help in whether the coliform or the bacteria was coming from the well source versus breaks in the line or other contamination sources?
Yeah, for those of you that know, the revised total coliform rule is distribution based. So when you get a positive in the distribution system, you have to go back to the well. So in the case of the scout camp, we're pretty sure a lot of those are from line breaks that they've had and maybe leaks that they don't know about. And so that's why we really hammer our systems on the sanitary survey about doing the maintenance, and the leak detection and repair is one of our evaluation items. From the wells themselves, I don't know that we have a way to know whether they're coming from the well itself or whether it's a distribution issue. We do have, I mentioned, I keep going back to the one guy that's certified operator. We keep him supplied with chlorine packs and hypochlorite, and he'll go out. We send him to our really small guys that don't have a lot of means. He'll go out, work with them, and disinfect the well. One of the things that he finds is frequently there's a lot of issues around the wellhead itself. The wellhead piping, the seal is off, the vent is missing. There's evidences of creatures crawling in and around, flying in and around. And so, again, a lot of these are in rural areas. It's very common for smaller systems in particular to use, rather than to pay to have a heat light or something in there, they'll wrap it with house insulation. And as soon as you pull that stuff back, you just, kick it and step back or pull it back with a stick. There's no telling what falls out of that. But I would say probably, it's certainly case by case, but a lot of the issues we have are coming from wells, and a lot of that is lack of operation and maintenance. And again, we have a really robust sanitary survey program, and that's why we try to hammer them on that during the survey itself.
Okay. I come at it from an engineering perspective, and I see a lot of seasonal and small systems, and it seems like a lot of states are really hesitant to use or to allow facilities to use hauled water as a source of water for various reasons. But it seems like hauled water can be if you start using hauled water in your distribution system and you're still getting positives, it seems like a good indication for whether or not it's a groundwater problem or a distribution system problem.
Right.
But does South Carolina allow hauled water to be used at sites?
Did you say old water?
Hauled water. Water that's hauled
like
in.
pump and hauled in? Yeah, we
Mhm.
do. We have certain regulations on that. It has to have a specific chlorine residual at the point of fill. Gosh, if I can remember. And I know one of the big ones is whatever you haul it in has to be designed for drinking water. So we don't want a milk truck to be used. We run into that more in emergency situations where we have hurricanes and other disasters where the people are bringing water. And we actually had pretty bad flooding in 2015, and some of the hospitals contracted with bulk water suppliers out of North Carolina to bring tanker trucks in, and then use the local fire department to help push that into the hospitals to keep them supplied. So we do allow that and have had that in some cases. Some of these smaller systems, though, it's a lot easier for them to hang a sign in the bathroom and tell people don't wash your hands with it. We've got hand sanitizer. Here's bottled water if you want to use it. Again, the national chain store I was mentioning, people aren't going in there. You may have a kid that needs a diaper change, but you're not going in there for a cool drink of water. And y'all have been in a lot of those places. I wouldn't touch it anyway. So, that's what we end up with.
Okay. Well, if anyone has any input on hauled water use, it seems like, depending on what state I work in, there aren't even any hauled water regulations at all, especially in the Southwest. And since people are supposed to be providing safe water for employees for OSHA and various reasons,
right,
it seems like an option that at least a lot of states are really against. So just curious.
Right. Thank you.
Just a suggestion, if you can find someone from Alaska, there are a lot of systems in Alaska where, especially the tribes, if there's anybody here, there are hauled water sites, folks who do haul water on a regular basis. Somebody raised their hand. Go ahead.
We have a lot of them in Alaska. The requirements we have is it has to go through engineering plan.
I need to interrupt. So everybody can hear you online.
It has to go through engineering review to make sure that it meets the requirements, everything's NSF approved and all that. And they must get their water from approved sources. So we have, I just did a sanitary survey on a haul truck. They get their well from, it used to be a mobile home parks, they use that well, or they have what they call Kenny Lake Fire Hall in Alaska, and it's just a community water source, and it's all regulated. So we do use a lot of hauled water.
Have you done that? Have you had any issues with level 2 assessment on hauled water?
Never had one. I mean,
I wanted to follow up too. I may have misunderstood you. You're talking about hauling in water for routine, normal purposes. I was thinking a bit more from a emergency response type. I don't know that we have anybody that hauls water in like you're suggesting and stores it. I'm not aware of that at this point. Sure.
Okay, one more quick one if somebody has it. Otherwise, we'll thank, oh, there we go.
Hi, my name is Jeff Brennan from the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection. I was just wondering if South Carolina has a waiver process in place for systems that are correct actions from a level 2 assessment for waiving either the requirement to conduct a level 2 assessment or RTR sampling in general.
I'm hearing impaired. If I understood you right, you asked if we have any waivers for doing level 2 assessments. Is that
or a process to review waiving the requirement to conduct a level 2 assessment or RTCR sampling in general? Like, I'm currently dealing with a couple of systems who have submitted a level 2 assessment, have determined that the source of the problem is within the raw water, and have elected to drill a new well.
Right.
And in that process, they're still required to sample. Every time they sample and get total coliform positives, they have to do another level 2 assessment, repeat sampling, and it's a financial drain on these systems. But New Jersey currently doesn't have a process in place.
We're actually, that's one of the sort of evolving things that we're working towards. When I mentioned multiple level 2 assessments, that's what's going on, is that we're working with them and they trigger again, or we got them cleaned up, they've done the corrective actions, and we might go a month or two and then they trigger again. We also have some, like the vet hospital was one of them, where they're in the middle of doing something, they trigger again. So we've recently talked closer with the Region 4, and the way I understand it is if you're already working with a system on a corrective action plan, you can consider them still under that plan as you're working and not have to keep going back out. You can conduct it on the phone. We've done phone level 2s. I don't know that I included that in the 78 that was on there, but a lot of times we'll call them, hey, has anything changed? And that way you're checking that box in SIDWIS, and if you get a data review, it shows that you followed up. But that is one of our challenges, is where we have them, you're already working with a system, and the next month, the lady that does our back T program comes down and says, hey, guess what? You know, the camp triggered again, or the vet hospital triggered again. And so we're right back to, man, we tried this last time. What do we do now? Because in a lot of cases, like you're talking about, you don't go out tomorrow and drill a new well and have it developed and you're ready to use. Some of these things might take a month or more, particularly a small system that might need to get some financial assistance. So we do run into that as well. We haven't done any waivers. We've tried to check the box and complete everything as best we can. So we haven't entertained that yet.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Okay, we need to get going here. Thank you, Richard. All right. Our next speaker, we're going to continue on with more on level 1 and 2 assessments. Our next speaker is Lucio Terniden. Sorry, Lucio. I practiced that and I messed it up. Chief of the Field Inspection Section, Indiana Department of Environmental Management. And again, he's going to talk to us about Indiana's efforts in implementing the RTCR and level 1 and level 2 assessments. Lucio.
Thank you. Appreciate this opportunity. We have been dealt this rule, so we're trying to do what we need to do. And Indiana is not alone with the challenges that come with implementing such a complex rule. And our planning started 2 years before the rule actually went into effect. So we started with the meeting process for that. Indiana has generally a small program, about 58 individuals in the drinking water branch, and we're tasked to implementing the Safe Drinking Water Act. You know, if all we had to do was the RTCR, would be in okay shape, but that's not all that we have to do. We have approximately 4,000 public water supplies divided into 781 community systems, 585 non-transient, non-community, and a lot of transient systems, seasonals and small systems. So 58 staff, generally, it's been about that. It goes up and down. Right now, we have a couple of vacancies. And so with every time we lose someone, you know, somebody else has to pick up that slack. So we're serving, or we provide safe water to approximately 5,425,000 people in Indiana, and a lot of the public water supplies are rural and spread out throughout the state. Southern Indiana is mainly a lot of distribution systems and networks, and Northern Indiana, you could park a car and conduct inspections at 20 facilities in an afternoon, you know, because of the groundwater is so plentiful up there. We had to move some people around because of their expertise and technical abilities. We took them out of the field section and put them into the capacity development section to help those folks with the data management and level 1s and level 2 assessments. And then recently we have had to hire 3 new field inspectors, and we're in the process of training them. So that slows down our ability to respond and provide that assistance. But we're charging on. The Revised Total Coliform Rule, if you are new to it, aims to improve public health protection by reducing pathways through which fecal contaminations and pathogens can enter distribution systems. And it evaluates and determines the effectiveness of treatment and signal possible microbial contamination. So we do that by level 1s and a level 2 assessment, similarly to Richard's program. Level 1 assessments, we allow the system to conduct those on their own. So they'll look at their own system and fill out a state-issued form to potentially identify deficiencies or sanitary defects, and hopefully get them to get some good samples. The rule went in effect April 1st of 2016, and Indiana has an effective rule just as of June of this year, and it's under EPA review, and hopefully we can get that finalized here shortly. We're just pins and needles waiting on it. So because of this rule, our general work has increased quite a bit from comparison numbers from 2015, where we were under the Total Coliform Rule, and then 2018 or 2017 in subsequent slides. Now we are under the new Revised Total Coliform Rule. So we have had an increase of 77% of systems that were required to sample monthly. So in 2015, 950 systems sampled monthly, and then in 2018, we were now upwards in the 1600s. So 781 community systems plus the large non-community systems over 1,000, so they sample monthly automatically. But now we added seasonal systems. And also we've had an increase dramatically of triggered monthly systems. So these are systems that by one reason or another got themselves into trouble, and now they're triggered from quarterly sampling up to monthly sampling. Indiana has a program, Small System Laboratory Assistance Program. So we contract with the State Department of Health to send bottles out free of charge to small transient nonprofit systems. So anybody that's a nonprofit with less than 100 in population are eligible for this program. So in 2015, we had 9 such systems sampling monthly, and now we're at 155. So not only IDEM, my agency, has had an increase in the workload, but also the State Department of Health. And then they're always wanting more money from us to operate that program. Although with all that extra sampling, the total coliform positive samples have not necessarily gone up dramatically, as you see here. But when you're looking at 52,000 systems in 2015, you have 794 positives, and then in 2017, 55,000 samples, where 947 are positive. So there's an increase of overall the program has increased in the workload. So with regards to assessments, 2015, of course, we had nothing. And by 2017, we were conducting 429 level 1s and level 2 assessments, where 287 were 1s and 142 were level 2s. So with this process of more positive samples or extra violations that systems accrue, there's a increased outreach effort to contact systems. So we're conducting more site visits, more technical assistance visits, more phone calls. We're trying to reach systems via email blasts and phone calls, and we're sending letters, and we have personal voicemails and communication to problem systems or systems that are struggling in an effort to get them to understand what the requirements are, to open the letter and look at it, and we've gotten to a 60% increase in violations. Systems get a positive sample, we scrambled, we get them a good sample, and then they forget to collect the 3 in the following month. So now, oh, I didn't know I had to do that because before we were waived. Well, we don't waive that anymore. You have to do the routine sample. So it's just an eternal thing. And so it's been a constant training effort to get systems to understand their requirements. And and thus, with all that increase in violations, we have a considerable increase in referrals, enforcement referrals. So you don't sample, you get a letter, or you sample, get a bad sample, you don't pull repeats, or you don't pull your next routine samples, or you don't, you do one thing or you don't do another. There's lots of ways to get into trouble with the RTCR. So systems are getting into trouble. So now our enforcement section is starting to feel the brunt of this, because they were used to 29 referrals. Now they're expecting, and it's an ongoing effort. Lots to come yet. So overall, we have increased as far as workloads, and Alan earlier today talked about man hours and 2 million man hours or whatever. And so yeah, we're added to that. We're part of that because of our small staff. Now we're considerable amount of our time is devoted to the RTCR. So our branch we have 3 sections of the branch that are involved in implementing and assisting systems in regards to the RTCR. With the Total Coliform and Compliance Support section, we have 1 full-time staff devoted to enforcement. That's all she does. It's write-up referrals because of one violation or another, or multiple violations. And as we look at the ETT and try to get the system to comply. And then we have 4 other staff to manage the bulk of the data, schedules, and monitoring reporting violations. So all that work. With the inspection section, we have about 11 inspectors divided into regions throughout the state of Indiana. And we're averaging per inspector approximately 380 to 350 public water supplies per inspector that they have to manage. So because they conduct sanitary surveys as required by the EPA, we also have to go out and look at new well locations. We respond to public complaints, and we do technical site visits and all the other work. We didn't want all the assessments to fall on the inspector's lap. So we decided to limit what inspectors are responsible for in regards to the RTCR. So inspectors will go out and conduct all level 2 assessments at community systems, all level 2s with an E. coli positive, and then all level 2 systems, level 2 assessments at systems with susceptible population. So schools, agricultural labor camps, and daycares. And then we have the capacity development section where 4 staff then review site sampling plans and conduct level 1 assessments over the phone and issue schedules and also level 2s. Then we also have an E7, which a level staff that tracks seasonal systems and issue violations. So we had several challenges where we're looking at over 50,000 routine samples collected per year, and our staff is tasked to enter those. We're working on requiring labs to automatically send that data to us and have it uploaded directly into the system electronically, but we're not there yet. It's a voluntary program right now, and we only have about 15% of the samples go in that way. So 85% of the samples we have to manually enter into the system. Violation letters are issued, and we have to track all of that, level 1 assessments, and the documentation to make sure that those are tracked and closed out. So we have to track all of that. Multiple level 1s at facilities. So those are all challenges that we're facing. We implemented a program to try to train certified water operators to be able to conduct level 2 assessments. So if a system needs a level 2 assessment done, they could hire someone to come and do that, and that person would, with the proper level 2 assessor certification, could do that work. And this was designed mostly for systems that were put on monthly sampling. After they have 12 months of a clean bill of health, then they would need a sanitary survey or a level 2 assessment to get back to quarterly sampling. So we're finding that that didn't work out as well as we were hoping. Trying to promote those individuals and people, systems don't want to pay for that sort of thing. So we're starting to reevaluate that. But also to date, we literally have only had like 4 systems that have found themselves in that situation. So it's not too bad. Inspectors will go out and do that level 2. Level 2 assessments and documentation, so we have to track and complete all that, make sure that we get corrective actions and dates of corrected issues and so on. And then we have certainly systems with multiple level 2s and identifying sanitary defects. So part of what I wanted to talk to you about is certainly the overall challenges that we're having, but also to a specific scenario of multiple level 2s. Richard talked about that, and I think you are not alone. We're not alone. Certainly, Indiana is in regards to this scenario. So level 2s are designed to go through the system with a fine-tooth comb and identify what's causing the problem. Well, sometimes you can't see that. Sometimes it's not, we can't see what the pathway is. So one of the communications we had with the EPA, and they mentioned that possibly biofilms were something that might be a cause of multiple positive samples in the system. So where source samples are good, distribution system samples are not good, why not look into this problem? So we started a program. So we're looking at biofilm as microorganisms, a community of microorganisms that attach themselves, and then they protect themselves by the nature of what they are. They protect themselves, and then they proliferate. So they're pretty hardy, and we need to attack them systematically. So we started a program where we identify systems with multiple level 2 assessments and try to pick good candidates, where we would go in and install sodium hypochlorite and another compound with that would help and aid in the process of removing biofilms, and trying to see whether that would change the results in the distribution system. So we would install the system, and we would monitor the levels of chemical injected on a daily basis. We would collect chlorine residuals and so on. And we would try that for about 4 to 8 weeks. And then we would collect samples throughout that period and hopefully return the system to compliance. So we got a grant, not a grant, actually came out of our funds, for a 2-year program, and we would pay an Indiana company, a consultant that would come in and install this system, and then do the monitoring and all of that. So then we would just pay them for that event. And so we have had a couple of systems, churches mainly, where we have had this system put in. This one happens to be in a pit. You can see the well in the middle there. It's a well seal, and there's a 5-gallon sodium hypochlorite on the left there, with a metering pump and a scale. And so some plumbing is involved, and then you have to calibrate the pumps and so on. And then between the consulting company and an individual at the facility, they would try to work out how they would monitor the amount of chemical and the chlorine residual in the system. So here's another injection point and a meter, and a pump and a meter. So we have to figure out what the dosages are and so on. So they'd come in, and they would, they're actually using a trademark chemical by this consulting firm. It's designed to break down biofilms. And so they would come in there, and they would flush the system with that, and then they would let it sit, and then they would flush it out, and then they would introduce the chlorine, and also a little bit more of the biofilm chemical. And so you would slow dose it throughout those weeks. So here's what another situation where that would look like. So on the left is the proprietary chemical from the company, and on the right is the sodium hypochlorite. There's different examples on how that. So we have had this put in and the 8 weeks, and we were able to get good systems at the end. Towards the end of the process, we were using these devices on the far reaches of the distribution system at the church, and these are automatic sprinkling timing units. So we would have it set to flush about 40 minutes in the morning and 30 minutes in the afternoon, just with an effort to create some demand in the distribution system to keep the chemicals injected and fresher into the system. So, so we had some good samples, and then towards the end of the process, somebody decided that this wasn't needed and they shut it off. And then the next sample was positive again. So, you know, so I think that flushing is really important. So not only, you know, if we're attacking biofilms in a system, but also we're finding that making sure that the distribution system is well flushed makes a big difference for us. So we're looking for other candidates in Indiana that have multiple level 2s and to see if they're good candidates with this process of injecting these chemicals, and see if we can get the distribution system cleaned out. Another facility we had problems with, they opted to get a new well, so they're in the same scenario where their well is yielding bad samples, but it takes time to get a new well in. And so we're trying to provide an emergency construction permit and have them try to, with some incentive, to get a well in as soon as they can to hopefully get some good samples. So new things keep happening all the time, so we have to work with it or around it. So we're constantly thinking of different ways to address it, but it takes a lot of communication and effort from both sides to make sure that they understand and get them back to compliance. So that should be it. Thank you. And if there are any questions,
yeah, we have some time for questions. You've managed to get us close back on schedule. So. Questions, you please use the mic, identify yourself. Questions? Yes, no? I guess not. Going once, going twice. Okay, it's late in the afternoon. Okay. Thank you, Lucio. All right. Let's see. To go back home here. See it. That would help. There we go. Yeah, escape. Okay. Yeah. All right, last but not least, and a name that I can't mess up, Maureen Pepper is a drinking water analyst, Idaho Department of Environmental Health. She is going to talk about one of the significant challenges with RTCR, that is seasonal systems, and the Idaho DEQ's efforts to find solutions on how to deal with them. That's the good news about RTCR is seasonal systems, and the bad news about RTCR is seasonal systems, right? Maureen.
Thanks, Mike. He knows my name well because I called him a lot when this became my job. Let's see. Okay. Well, I'm bringing up the rear, and I will get us to home plate as quickly as possible. Just a little baseball reference there. So in listening to everyone present today and to the webinars we had a few months back about the seasonal systems, New Jersey and Maine presented on a webinar on the small systems program, that Idaho is not that terribly unique with a lot of the challenges that we have. You know, small amount of staff, very rural areas, things like that. A lot of the same issues a lot of states have. So just a little overview of our drinking water program. I'll go through that, some of the issues and problems that we had, discussions that a work group we had. We formed a work group to deal with some of those issues, and then some solutions and tools that we came up with, and then the feedback and outcomes that we had from that so far. So Idaho's public water systems, we have just under 2,000, which is really small compared to what I'm hearing from other folks. It does seem still terribly daunting to us for our staff that we have what we have. 95% of that is groundwater, 5% is surface water. Those numbers are a little bit obtuse maybe to us, because in 5%, our largest system is over 200,000, and that's the Treasure Valley where I live in Boise. That is the largest system, and that's the bulk of our surface water, folks drinking from surface water. So it's a lot still on the surface water. For seasonal systems, we have about 331, and those are split between, pardon the acronyms for those of you who are not CIDWIS states, the APIO, the pressurized all year, versus those that are not pressurized year-round, and those are split up there. So our program exists of our state office, where I work as a rule manager of a handful of rules. We have 6 regions. We have 7 health districts. Our health districts are split up based on population, and Idaho DEQ contracts out to our health districts to help us for compliance with our water systems, but only for our groundwater systems. Our surface water systems are managed only by the DEQ. Let's see. Some of the issues and problems that Idaho has had with the RTCR. First of all, the winter following the RTCR becoming live for us to implement was the worst winter Idaho had seen in about 30 years. For those of you who are here from the Pacific Northwest, Northern California, Utah, we had a really hefty winter. Feet and feet of snow that never seemed to melt till about April, which is not typically normal. We're a very arid state, at least in the lower half of it. So that was our #1 challenge really that year, and coming out of that and implementing this rule. Compliance, I'm sure many of you had this same problems, not getting that checklist done in time. The opening dates for our seasonal systems vary quite a lot, especially following these hefty winters that this hefty winter we had. The dates for opening systems, whether they're campgrounds or whatever they might be, vary greatly. And within that same vein, operators are really difficult to get a hold of in their off season. So trying to find out when they're going to open, and you can't get a hold of them on a phone because they might be out of state or in an area where there isn't cell service, whatever the reason you can't get a hold of them, that was a challenge as well. And then lack of understanding of the new requirements. Change is difficult. And we have new operators. We all have had that situation. And so getting them to comply with the new rules, there's a little bit of growing pains with that. I think we've all seen that. And then we also had a lack of a checklist for a hand pump. Not that there's a lot involved there, but that was something that we didn't have. Our Forest Service campgrounds, which DEQ manages, those are mainly hand pumps in those campgrounds. So we formed a seasonal work group to deal with some of the issues. The state office, the RTCR staff lead, and the backup, which is myself, led that work group. Regions participated as well as our health districts, realizing that, I think I mentioned this before to a colleague in the room, is that when you have issues at the state level, or whether it's federal, talking to the states, talking to the folks on the ground, dealing with the operators, the compliance folks, to really know what the issues are. Don't assume you know what the problems are. Talk to them. Find out what they really need, what the real challenge is. Our health districts actually have more of those seasonal systems because of our contract out to them to help us with the groundwater systems. They have many more, so they have a little bit more of the burden on getting these seasonal systems up to speed to open. And we have the 2 seasons. We'll have the summer season, opening for the summer season, and in the fall we have a few that are opening in the fall, things like a couple of schools and things like that. So we realized we had to offer multiple ways for the checklist to be completed, for these systems to be in compliance. So we sat around and came up with a few ideas, possibly a prepaid postcard, a call-in option, where the compliance officer could take the information and then enter that information into SIDWIS somewhere in the notes, and then possibly put something into a shared file where any of the compliance officers or someone like myself who's managing the rule could look up that information very, very easily. Then there was a large discussion about the state office versus the regional offices sending out a checklist, sending out the letters about the information about the compliance for the rules. And what we realized quickly, in my humble opinion, was, well, the compliance officers are the ones that work hands-on with the public water system operators, not me. They don't know who I am. They're wondering, who is this person at the state office sending me this letter? I don't know who this is, what is happening. So they have an established relationship with the regions, so we decided that the state office could produce those letters, those templates for them, but the regions really were the ones that needed to send those out. Also, to stress the requirement for collecting a seasonal startup sample and a routine sample for compliance. The one thing that Idaho does require for its systems that are pressurized all year round is we do require a sample or construction, as we call it, construction or special sample prior to opening. Despite the fact that they are pressurized year round, we still do require that, but they do not have to do the checklist, just the systems that are not pressurized all year. And then also, again, we felt we needed a checklist of some sort for the hand pumps. So some of the tools that the work group came up with were this. I don't expect you to read this. And my apologies for putting up there. Basically, we built a template letter that had 2 purposes. One would be an actual hard letter that would be mailed out to the system operators, but this also was served as an email that was sent out in our auto dialer. I don't know if anyone else uses an auto dialer, but we've been using that since 2010, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. So this was a prepaid postcard that we developed. It goes through all the requirements for a seasonal startup checklist. I'm pointing out to number 5 where we put in the bacteria sample labeled as construction. I think a lot of the challenge for the systems were they didn't understand that there's a difference between the startup sample and their compliance sample. They are not the same sample. So we emphasized that here, and that had to be collected 30 days prior. We put in the water system's name, all of that, and then we have a field office section to check. So this is what our prepaid, pre-addressed postcard looked like. So what we did with this was we sent the hard letter, we put the postcard in the letter, so that the system could just use this card as their checklist and then just mail it back already to their regional office. We labeled it to their regional offices. So our auto dialer, that template that I showed, our auto dialer is a phone and an email. So in our Pocatello region, we had several years back in 2010, we noticed that we had a really low number of failure to monitor violations, and we wondered why or how. It turned out that the compliance officer there was a dog on a bone. She called every system constantly. If she saw them out of compliance, she was constantly on the phone. But it's very time consuming to do that. So our lead for this decided, well, how can we replicate that consistent calling? So we purchased and started using our auto dialer in the summer of 2010. long prior to my being there. But the auto dialer delivers a phone call and an email to a system that has not sampled within the last 2 weeks of a compliance period. The system can make approximately 110 calls per hour on 4 lines, and we have had a 52% reduction in failure to monitors since then, since 2010, which is enormous. Just that constant reminder, which I constantly get into. One of the other ways the system can comply is we actually have there are different templates and forms on our website. This is our switchboard. We have 2 versions of our switchboard. This is our external switchboard for operators specifically. Anything they need, they can come here. It's a one-stop shop. Rather than trying to find it on our website, which I personally can't find things on our website sometimes, so they come here and they say, okay, and I've highlighted the RTCR down in the bottom left to you, that they can go there and they're the forms to fill out rather than just a postcard checklist. That's another way, and that's what we've had up until the postcard. This is what we've used, so they're familiar with it, so we'll get that quite a bit. We actually do have an internal version of this that is designed for our staff, so it doesn't look the same. There aren't as many buttons on it. But many of these go just straight to our website or straight to a form, so it just made it a lot easier. And then suggested changes. One of the things we also did with the work group, we came up with things that we might need to change for our sanitary survey. Adding a module for seasonal systems, and then adding some additional questions possibly. Procedures that were completed, was a checklist submitted, asking a question whether the system was pressurized year-round or not, and then adding a question for systems that might meet conditions for a startup exemption, which are things like they haven't had a violation in a certain period of time, or they have no significant deficiencies, things like that. We did not get all of these. We got the last 2 bullets because we realized we had other mechanisms in place that actually caught the other ones. We didn't need to elongate our sanitary survey anymore. We've had about 20 or 21 different versions of our survey. We're constantly changing and updating it to serve us and serve the compliance officers and the systems better. Some of this feedback and outcomes that we got on the combination of the postcards and the auto dialer, we're working for improvements from 2017. It generated a lot of calls from operators regarding the change in opening dates. That, again, was a big challenge of that is a constant moving target every year. We never know when the system's really actually going to open. But they would, getting the letter saying, oh, you opened on this date last year, it prompted them to call and say, oh, no, we can't open for another 2 weeks. We've still got snow on the ground, things like that. Our compliance officers are still making individual calls. It's really just a necessary evil. And then our pre-seasonal sampling is still struggling, especially for those systems that are pressurized year-round. It's just that continued challenge of understanding the new requirements and giving them a little room to understand. And so each year it gets a little bit better, and I hope it continues. We'll see if we get a big fat winter. Again, as a skier, it was great, but I understand for our seasonal systems, it was pretty tough. Let's see, I think that's it. If anyone has any questions, I'll be around all week.
We have plenty of time.
Oh, I went really fast.
Yes, she did. She did a really good job. We have plenty of time for questions. So again, please use the mic. Please identify yourself. It's late in the day. I have a question.
Okay.
Startup procedures for seasonal systems. Do you have a policy? Do you have a?
Where is it? Startup procedures are here on our checklist.
Okay.
I don't have to read them, but basically doing an inspection, doing a sample prior to opening, submitting all of that they flush their system, they take that back T sample, we get the results back prior to them opening. Some systems haven't been able to open because they might have a back T hit, things like that.
And the other one is, since these are seasonal, do you have problems with contact info, phone numbers, addresses?
all the time.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, no, like I said, I think our systems are not unique to other states. Being able to get a hold of folks in the off season, I think a lot of them are snowbirds. You know, they dive out of Idaho and maybe go to Florida or somewhere. But yeah, they're hard to get a hold of. And also the operator turnover too, constantly with the rules and folks taking over. We've got a lot of folks retiring, things like that. So I know that's everyone's challenge, bringing new folks up to speed.
Other questions?
Hi, my name is Willie Nickerson. I'm from the state of Vermont, and I'm wondering if any of this effort or the discussions might have touched on construction standards for temporary or seasonal water systems.
I don't believe we had any discussions about that.
Things like making flushing easier or sample locations or anything like that that might be more specific for the seasonal systems.
Right. That didn't come up in our work group discussions, no. We're actually bringing the work group together again probably in the next month to talk about how this year went, and for our systems that are opening now, to reinvigorate that group again, to reevaluate it and see if we need to make any more improvements, or if what we did really did help. Thanks.
Hi, Ken Rodert with EPA. I was just wondering how you handle return to compliance, and if there are certain situations where some of these seasonal systems might have delayed openings because of having to address some of the problems you find in the sanitary surveys or the assessments and that sort of thing.
Right. Yeah, we've had a few of those, not too many, but I think it's mostly the systems that are not getting their samples in on time and done, and they're out of compliance. If you have more specific questions, I can give you the leads information. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Annie Chida with Communities Unlimited RCAP. And my question was several of my questions. One of them is in the startup and shutdowns that I have seen for the Revised Total Coliform Rule for seasonal systems is incomplete. And to me, when they're starting up a system, you've got to go through your disinfection process, flushing and all that. And there's nowhere in there to show what you did, how you did it, your residuals, your documentation on how things were done. And I've got quite a few of my systems that I'm working with that they don't shut down their whole system. They only isolate part of it, and there's no documentation showing that. Right. And that's something that I feel like it should be shown or documented some way, so that can go further as a record should go. Right. But is that something that y'all are looking at down the road?
Okay. We actually do have systems that part of the system will shut down and part will not. I think what we've come to the conclusion is that we can add that into our sanitary survey process so that we can understand the system better. Putting things that I find easy from my standpoint, my job mainly is to help our systems as a rule manager. And when I go into CIDWIS and I see notes about how the system operates or what it is, or going to the previous sanitary survey, the narrative on those surveys is so absolutely critical. I've seen lots of sanitary surveys where there isn't a lot of narrative, and a lot of times you can't really understand what's going on with the system, and it's almost the historical record of the system. So I think those are ways you can do that, but incorporating it into the survey and having the compliance officers really understanding their system, the system, letting you know for sure. I think it's a question you should ask right up front. Do you shut down the whole system, part of the system, and somehow you denote that in the system's files so that you know?
Yeah, because without the documentation and anybody knowing, not everybody is going to understand. And that person leaves and somebody new comes in, they have no idea what's going on from previous records because nothing was documented. And many times I get asked from primacy, did they bleach? They're not documenting chlorine residuals. They're not documenting where and what they did. And these are things that I feel that should be on there because right now it's not a complete documentation of what was done to get it up.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks.
My name is Tim Zerfus. I'm from Western New York. I work for the Cattaraugus County Department of Health up there. And I just a little bit of a spin-off of what she just said, but a lot of our small, seasonal, non-community water systems, they have disinfection. A lot of them are UV, and they are not technically required to disinfect with chlorine. They have to flush.
Yeah.
And what we do a lot of times, our little local health department has its own Bacti lab. So the public health sanitarians will go out there and physically collect the samples, and we have to visually inspect that UV unit because those little water system operators are very clever, and they can bypass those certain little automatic shutoff valves and unplug and, you know, sort of bypass that disinfection there. So if we don't go out and show face and verify that the disinfection equipment is working as designed, we might not, you know, go out there to collect a sample for a quarter or until the next regular routine monitoring. So, you know, part of our little county policy is to basically visually inspect on top of going out there and collecting the samples. That is what we do. We collect the samples for them, and then they have to submit that.
Okay.
But we're very small, and we have that sort of, you know, the manpower to do that. So do you guys have any kind of, other than doing that, making sure that they did the disinfection like she said, or if they have a UV light that it's operating as it's designed?
There was a lot in that question. I think that, well, Idaho has systems that disinfect. The disinfection is not required unless there's evidence to show that it needs to be required. So we do have systems that don't disinfect. As far as us going out and taking samples, no, we don't do that. That's the operator's requirement. I think the message is trust but verify. We are in a trust-based system. If they are sending you information that is false, obviously that'll be a problem for them if they've falsified information, things like that. I think that everyone can admit that they probably have systems that disinfect prior to sampling, things like that, masking problem. But we don't go out and sample. That's amazing that you can do that. If a system has trouble and they just can't figure it out, our staff will go out and help the system. But unless they get to that point, we're not able to be there like that. We don't have that number of staff in our state. I think that, I don't know the exact distance, but some of our regional offices, our systems are a few hours away. It's not, it's pretty remote in some areas. So sorry if I didn't answer your question. We don't have the same situation. Michelle.
Hi, Maureen.
Hi.
Michelle Latham with US EPA. I have a question from the webinar. I'm just going to go ahead and, since we don't have much time, I'll just read one. The first one that came in for your talk, it's, does a public water system get a violation if they don't do the pre-seasonal special sample?
Yeah, I mean, they're not in compliance if they don't do that.
Okay.
Yes.
And I'll let somebody else has a question. If I don't know that we'll have time, we have others. I don't know if we'll have time because I know Darren needs to make a statement, but I'll step back here. Okay.
Hi, my name is Mark Pauley. I work for the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. I don't have any questions, but I have some observations.
Okay.
Wisconsin has 11,400 public water systems, of which 9,800 are transient.
Wow.
I'm the transient statewide expert. So I have a couple comments. One is, I think the need to monitor pH during sodium hypochlorite disinfection is extremely important. Difference between hypochlorous acid and hypochlorite ion. Most total coliform bacteria have a negative charge to their cell wall, and when we have a pH that's greater than 7.5 to 8, you switch that ratio to the hypochlorite ion, which is negative in charge, and you'll get a repellent effect to the total coliform bacteria, and they are not allowed to attach themselves. They have the contact time to kill the bacteria. I didn't hear anything else about dead end lines. So the average TN system in my district, of which I have 2,500 that I oversee, are about 75 years old, and there's a lot of building modifications that occur. And if you have a dead end line that's located within the distribution system, you'll never be able to get by a bacterial problem because you can't purge that line. The bacteria will get present, they can crawl up into the dead end line, and if you can't get that purged, you're not going to get by your bacteria issue. The other thing I'd like to comment on is timing with biofilms. Biofilms can form in a matter of days to a week or a couple weeks, and it's really important to get on those biofilms quickly so that you can get them before they have their defenses up. And once a biofilm is established in a well or in a system, most of the time in Wisconsin, we would have to scrub that well, and I didn't hear anything about that. You can, if you do a continual disinfection and it does not penetrate that polysaccharide layer, you never get past it. So the best type of disinfection is a shock type of disinfection instead of continual disinfection. And you need to get on that biofilm quickly, because if it can establish itself, they have many defenses in which they can aid against disinfection. Many of them is one of them is quorum sensing, in which they can close the interstitial spaces within that ESP. There's just getting on that biofilm quickly is really important once it's identified that you have an ongoing total coliform bacteria issue. Thank you.
Okay. Just to the presenters, we don't have time for more questions. We do have a lot of questions from the webinar, so we'll make sure that you all get these questions that came in for your talks. Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Maureen. Can we thank the rest of all the speakers, please? Before I forget, there is a yellow evaluation form in your packet that we would hope you would fill out as you go along. It helps with planning a lot. So thank you, and Darren has closing us out.
Just a real quick, three quick announcements. Just remember, tomorrow morning we start at 7:30, so it's a little earlier. We do have one ticket. Someone changed their mind on the game, so there's a ticket available. Tom Speth is going to be out in the hallway, and if you want that ticket, I think it's $25. Approach him, and anybody who is going to the ball game and wants to meet in a group, there's going to be a group meeting at registration at about 6:15. So that's about it. Have a good night, and we'll see you first thing in the morning. Thanks.
You.